In a rundown garage where nobody looks twice, a woman with weathered hands rebuilds a disabled child's broken mobility device through the night. She refuses payment from the desperate mother. The next morning, a Navy admiral arrives at her door. He examines her tools, her precision, the military tags she thought no one would recognize. Then he says 5 words that shatter her hidden world. "I pulled your service record. From which city in the world are you watching this video today?" If you enjoy stories about hidden heroes finally being seen, consider subscribing. What the Admiral discovered would change everything she thought she'd left behind. The fluorescent light in the garage flickered 3 times before settling into a sickly yellow hum. Rain drummed against the corrugated metal roof in a rhythm that matched the steady work of hands too skilled for such a forgotten place. The garage sat wedged between a shuttered auto body shop and a vacant lot where weeds pushed through. Cracked asphalt. Most people drove past without a second glance. Inside, Lorian Pascoe worked alone. Her fingers moved across the disassembled wheelchair motor with the kind of precision that spoke of training far beyond what anyone would expect from a neighborhood mechanic. She wore faded cargo pants stained with grease and a thermal shirt that had seen too many winters. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face carried the kind of weathered exhaustion that comes from years of carrying weight no one else could see. The scar along her right forearm caught the light as she reached for a torque wrench. It ran from her wrist nearly to her elbow, a puckered line of tissue that told a story she never shared. When she walked, there was the faintest hitch in her left leg, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. She never complained about it. The workbench was organized with military precision. Every tool hung in its designated spot on a pegboard that showed the ghost outlines of items that had been there for years: micrometers, calipers, specialty wrenches that most civilian mechanics would never need. In the back corner, partially covered by a tarp, sat a machinist's lathe that seemed entirely out of place in a garage that fixed wheelchairs and walkers. A handwritten repair log sat open on the bench. The entries were neat, methodical. Mrs. Gavami, Walker Repair, $40. Mr. Chen, scooter battery replacement, $35. The prices were always lower than they should have been. Sometimes there was no price at all, just a dash where the number should go. It was past 11 when Lorian finally reassembled the motor. She tested it 3 times, listening to the sound it made, feeling for vibrations that would indicate an imbalance. Satisfied, she wiped her hands on a rag and added a note to the log. Rhett Morrison, scooter motor rebuild, $85, ready Thursday. She closed the notebook and looked around the garage as if seeing it for the first time. The apartment above the garage was reached by an exterior staircase that creaked under even her light weight. Inside, the space was sparse in a way that went beyond simple poverty. A military-style cot sat against one wall, made with corners so tight a quarter would bounce off the blanket. A hot plate and a cheap coffee maker occupied the counter. Physical therapy resistance bands hung from a hook near the window. On the wall, a single photograph frame sat face down on a small shelf. She never turned it over. Morning came too early. Lorian was back in the garage by 6, brewing coffee in a dented percolator that had seen better decades. The ancient flip phone on her workbench remained silent. Most of her clients found her through word of mouth, whispered recommendations from one struggling family to another. She never advertised. She never had to. The first client arrived at 7:30. Rhett Morrison pulled up in a pickup truck. That burned oil, the scooter secured in the bed. He was in his 70s, a Vietnam veteran with a VA baseball cap and hands that shook slightly from old injuries. He unloaded the scooter with practiced efficiency, rolling it into the garage with a grunt. "Insurance won't cover the repair anymore," he said without preamble. "They say it's too old. Want me to buy a new one?" He laughed without humor. "Like I have $3,000 lying around." Lorian inspected the scooter, testing the controls, checking the battery connections. Motors rebuilt. New brushes cleaned the commutator, replaced the worn bearings. Should run smoother than it did new. Rhett pulled out his wallet, counting bills with those shaking hands. "You quoted 85? 85. That's half what the shop in town wanted just to look at it." She accepted the money without comment and helped him load the scooter back into his truck. He lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, then just nodded and drove away. The whole interaction had taken less than 10 minutes. That was how Lorian preferred it. Across the street, Devra Okonkwo watched from her kitchen window. She was in her 50s, a home healthcare worker who had lived in the neighborhood her entire life. She knew everyone's business, but Lorian Pascoe remained a mystery even after 3 years. "She's out there again," Devra said to her husband, who was reading the morning paper at their kitchen table. "Who?" "The mechanic, the one in the garage." Her husband, Marcus, glanced up briefly. "What about her?" 3 years she's been there, never talks about where she came from, never has visitors, never goes anywhere except to that garage. It's not natural. Maybe she just likes her privacy. Everyone has a before, Marcus. Everyone. But her, it's like she appeared out of nowhere." Devra had tried to be neighborly when Lorian first moved in. She had brought over a casserole, knocked on the door upstairs. Lorian had accepted it, politely thanked her, but the conversation had died there. No invitation inside, no shared stories. Just a quiet acknowledgement and a closed door. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Lorian worked through 2 more repairs, methodical and unhurried. Around noon, a younger man dropped off a power wheelchair that had stopped responding to the joystick. She took it without promising a timeline, just said she would call when it was ready. He offered to pay up front. She refused. By evening, the garage had emptied out. Lorian swept the floor, organized her tools, wiped down the workbench. The power wheelchair sat in the corner, its control panel already partially disassembled. She would start on it tomorrow. For now, she made instant ramen on the hot plate upstairs and ate it while standing at the window, looking out at the street below. The rain returned around 9. It started as a drizzle, then built into a steady downpour that turned the street into a river of reflected streetlights. Lorian had just returned to the garage, intending to work on the wheelchair for an hour or two, when headlights cut through the rain. The car that pulled up was a battered sedan that had seen better years. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. A woman emerged from the driver's side, moving quickly to the trunk. She lifted something out, cradling it carefully despite the rain soaking through her jacket. Lorian recognized it immediately. A pediatric mobility device, custom-built, with a specialized frame and actuator system. The kind of equipment that cost tens of thousands of dollars and required trained technicians to maintain. The woman carried it like it was made of glass. She burst through the garage door, water streaming from her clothes. "I know you're closed," she said, breathless. "I'm sorry. I called 6 places. They all said no. They said it's proprietary hospital equipment. They can't touch it." Her voice cracked. "Please, I don't know where else to go." Lorian looked past her to the car. A small face pressed against the back window. A girl, maybe 7 years old, watching everything with wide, hopeful eyes. "Put it on the bench," Lorian said. The woman, whose name was Sienna, set the device down with shaking hands. Up close, Lorian could see the desperation etched into her face, dark circles under her eyes, fingernails bitten down to nothing, the look of someone who had been fighting an impossible battle for too long. Lorian examined the device under the harsh fluorescent light. It was sophisticated work, far beyond typical mobility aids. Custom hydraulic actuators, micro-servo motors, a control system that would respond to the smallest movements. The kind of equipment designed for children with severe neuromuscular conditions, built to support their growth and adapt to their specific needs. It was also completely non-functional. The hydraulic system had failed, the actuators were seized, and the control board showed signs of water damage. Lorian could see why 6 shops had refused it. This was not a standard repair. This required fabrication, custom parts, and expertise that most technicians simply did not have. "Her name is Bryn," Sienna said quietly. "She has a rare condition, something with her nerves and muscles. The doctors, they use big words I can barely pronounce. But what it means is that without this device, she can't stand, can't walk, can't even hold herself upright for more than a few seconds." Lorian's fingers traced the frame, feeling for stress points, checking the integrity of the welds. "The company that made it went out of business 2 years ago," Sienna continued. "Parts don't exist anymore. The hospital said it was irreplaceable, that we'd have to adapt, get her a wheelchair, accept that this part of her life was over." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She's 7 years old. She's supposed to have her whole life ahead of her. How long has it been broken? 3 weeks. Her physical therapist says every day without it, her muscles get weaker. She's losing ground. If it goes on much longer, even if we could fix it, she might not be strong enough to use it anymore. The girl in the car, Bryn, was still watching. Even through the rain-streaked window, Lorien could see the hope in her expression, the kind of hope that children have before the world teaches them that sometimes things don't get fixed. Lorien set down the wrench she had been holding. "How much can you pay?" Sienna pulled out her wallet with trembling hands. "I have maybe $200. I can do payments. Whatever you need, I'll figure it out." The garage was silent except for the rain on the roof. Lorien looked at the device, then at the woman, then at the face in the window. Something shifted in her expression, a decision made in the space between one breath and the next. "Leave it with me. When should I come back?" "Give me 48 hours. Sienna's face flooded with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't. Thank you." She carried Bryn back to the car, both of them soaked through. As they drove away, the little girl turned in her seat, waving through the back window. Lorien stood in the garage doorway, watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then she turned back to the workbench and got to work. The device was worse than she had initially assessed. The hydraulic cylinders were not just seized, but corroded internally. The servo motors had burned out from trying to operate against the frozen system. The control board would need to be completely rebuilt. This was not a repair. This was a resurrection. Lorien cleared the entire workbench, giving herself the room to work. She disassembled the device with methodical care, laying out each component in order, photographing the configuration with her phone so she could replicate it exactly. The hydraulics came apart to reveal pitted cylinders and degraded seals. The motors showed heat damage. The circuit board was a map of failed traces and corroded connections. She pulled out her technical notebook and began sketching. Not just notes, but proper engineering diagrams with stress calculations and material specifications. Her handwriting was precise, the kind that came from filling out maintenance logs in conditions where mistakes could cost lives. She calculated hydraulic pressures, servo torque requirements, control system response times. The parts she needed did not exist in any civilian catalog. The company that built this device had used proprietary components, custom designed for this specific application. Lorien would have to fabricate them from scratch. She moved to the locked cabinet in the back of the garage. Inside were materials that seemed out of place in a neighborhood repair shop. Aerospace-grade aluminum stock, titanium rod, high-performance hydraulic fluid rated for military applications. She had accumulated these over the years, buying them bit by bit with money she should have used for food or rent. The machinist's lathe came out from under its tarp. It was an old Hardinge, built when precision still meant something, capable of tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The kind of equipment that belonged in a professional machine shop, not a garage in a forgotten neighborhood. Lorien had bought it at an auction 3 years ago, spending nearly everything she had saved. She had never regretted it. She set up the first cut, aluminum stock spinning at precise RPM, cutting oil flowing across the surface. The tool bit moved with computer-like precision, guided by her hands. She fabricated a new hydraulic cylinder, matching the dimensions exactly, improving the tolerances where the original design had been weak. The work took 2 hours. In a professional shop, it would have taken a day and cost $1,000. The servo motors were next. She couldn't fabricate those, but she could modify standard motors to fit the application. She pulled motors from her parts stock, commercial units that were close but not quite right. She machined new mounting brackets, rewound the armatures for different torque curves, fitted them with custom gears she cut on a small mill. The circuit board required different skills. She cleaned the corrosion with specialized solvents, traced the failed connections with a multimeter, soldered new paths where the old ones had corroded away. The work required absolute steadiness, working under magnification, connecting traces so small they were barely visible. Time became irrelevant. The coffee went cold, the rain stopped. The first light of dawn began to creep through the garage door. Lorien's hands trembled from fatigue, but they never wavered in their precision. This was muscle memory from another life, a life where this level of work was done under pressure, where failure meant people did not come home. By 6 in the morning, the device was reassembled. She filled the new hydraulic system, bled the air from the lines, connected the power. The control system booted up, ran its diagnostic sequence, found no errors. She tested the actuators, watching them extend and retract with smooth, controlled motion. The servo motors responded instantly to commands, no lag, no hesitation. She put the device through its full range of motion, checking for binding, feeling for rough spots, listening for sounds that would indicate problems. It moved like water, smooth and precise, better than it had been when it left the factory. Lorian sat back on her work stool, exhausted. Her back ached, her leg throbbed, her hands were cramping from 16 straight hours of precise work. But the device was whole, it was functional, it would work. At 7:30, earlier than the 48 hours she had promised, Sienna's car pulled up to the garage. The woman got out quickly, unable to wait any longer, hope and fear written across her face. Lorian emerged from the garage, carrying the device. It gleamed under the morning sun, cleaned and polished, every component perfect. Sienna's hands went to her mouth. "Is it really fixed?" "Bring her inside." They helped Bryn into the device, adjusting the straps, checking the fit. The girl's legs had weakened in the 3 weeks without it, but Lorian had accounted for that in her calibrations. She activated the system, feeling the hydraulics engage, watching the servos respond to Bryn's smallest movements. Bryn stood. For the first time in 3 weeks, she stood upright without collapsing. Her face transformed, wonder replacing the resignation that had settled there. She took a step, supported by the device, then another, then a third. "It doesn't hurt anymore," Bryn whispered, as if afraid speaking too loud would break the spell. Sienna collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Not quiet tears, but the kind of crying that comes from a dam finally breaking from pressure, held too long. She reached for her daughter, pulled her into a hug, both of them crying now. Lorian adjusted a strap that had twisted, checked the hydraulic pressure one more time, made a small calibration to the left actuator. Her face remained impassive, but something in her eyes had softened. "Just bring her back if anything needs adjusting," she said. "The system might need fine-tuning as she uses it." Sienna stood, pulling crumpled bills from her purse. "I have this now. It's not all of it, but I can bring more next week, and the week after, however long it takes." Lorian closed Sienna's hand around the money, pushing it back toward her. "Keep it." "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" "Because someone has to." They loaded the device into the car, Bryn still taking tentative steps, marveling at her own ability to move. As they prepared to drive away, Sienna turned back one more time. "I don't even know your name." "Lorian." "Thank you, Lorian. Thank you for giving my daughter her life back." The car pulled away, Bryn waving from the window with both hands, her face lit with pure joy. Lorian watched until they disappeared, then returned to the garage. She picked up her repair log, opened it to a new page. Pediatric mobility device, Type 7 actuator rebuild. In the price column, she wrote a single 0. She closed the notebook and made fresh coffee. The exhaustion was catching up to her now, but there was other work waiting. The power wheelchair still needed its control system rebuilt. A walker was due for pickup this afternoon. She would rest later. The day passed in its normal rhythm. Clients came and went. Lorian worked with her usual quiet competence. By evening, she was running on fumes, her body demanding sleep she had denied it for too long. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, ate a can of soup cold from the tin, and fell into the cot without bothering to undress. She assumed the moment with Bryn and Sienna was over. Another family. Helped, another repair completed, another day of trying to balance some invisible scale that could never truly be balanced. She slept without dreaming. Morning came with mechanical inevitability. Lorian was back in the garage by 6, brewing coffee, preparing to start on a walker that had come in yesterday. The street outside was quiet, the usual traffic of people heading to work or school. At 7:15, a vehicle pulled up that did not belong in this neighborhood. A black SUV with government plates, windows tinted dark, paint polished to an impossible shine. Lorian glanced up from her workbench, assuming it was lost, that it would turn around and leave. Instead, 2 people got out. They wore navy dress uniforms, the kind reserved for official duties, not casual visits. Service ribbons across their chests, insignia that marked them as active duty personnel. They stood by the vehicle for a moment, consulting a tablet, confirming something. Across the street, Devra Okonkwo watched from her window, phone already in hand. "Marcus, you need to see this." The two sailors approached the garage with purpose. They did not knock, but they stopped at the entrance, waiting to be acknowledged. Lorian set down her wrench slowly, wiping her hands on her pants. "Can I help you?" The senior of the two, a petty officer with 20 years of service written in the lines of his face, stepped forward. "Are you Lorian Pascoe?" Something cold settled in her stomach. "Yes." He held up the tablet, showing her something. A photograph of the pediatric mobility device. A report of some kind. Text she could not read from this distance, but could guess at. "Ma'am, Rear Admiral Aldridge would like to speak with you." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Lorian's mouth went dry. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake, ma'am. He's on his way now. Should be here in about 5 minutes." The petty officer paused. "He wanted us to confirm your identity first. Make sure we had the right person." Lorian looked past them to the street. A second vehicle was approaching. Not an SUV this time, but a staff car, the kind used to transport senior officers. It pulled up with precision, parking behind the first vehicle. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out. Late 50s or early 60s, gray at the temples, weathered face that had seen more than most. The uniform was dress blues, chest covered in ribbons that told a story of a career spent at sea and in harm's way. On his shoulder boards, the 2 stars of a rear admiral. He walked past the petty officers, past the protocol, directly to where Lorian stood, frozen in the garage doorway. Up close, his eyes were sharp, assessing, the kind that missed nothing. "May I come in?" Lorian could only nod, stepping aside. The admiral entered the garage, and his gaze swept across the space with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating equipment and people. He saw the tools hung with precision. He saw this machinist's lathe in the corner. He saw the repair log on the workbench. He picked up a torquey wrench, turned it over in his hands. Military grade, asset tag still visible, faded but readable. USN Maintenance Unit 7. He set it down carefully and looked at the lathe, at the materials in the cabinet, at the specialized equipment that had no business being in a civilian garage. Then he turned to face her, and his expression had changed. Recognition? Respect. Something deeper. "You helped my daughter." The words hit Lorian like a physical blow. "Bryn is your daughter?" "My daughter and my entire world. 3 weeks ago, her doctors told us her device was irreparable, that she would need to adapt to life in a wheelchair, permanently." His voice was steady, controlled, but emotion bled through at the edges. "Then my wife tells me that a mechanic in a garage fixed it in one night. Fixed something that specialists with advanced degrees and unlimited resources said was impossible." He picked up another tool, examined the precision of her workspace, the organization that could only come from military training. His gaze fell on the asset tags, the equipment that should have been decommissioned years ago. "These aren't civilian techniques," he said quietly. "These tolerances, this precision. This is specialized training, the kind that takes years to develop, the kind that the Navy spends hundreds of thousands of dollars teaching to a very select few." Lorian said nothing. Her jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. The admiral saw the notebook, still open to the page where she had logged Bryn's repair, 0 in the price column. "You refused payment from my wife. You spent what must have been 16, 18 hours rebuilding a device that would cost $40,000 to replace. You fabricated parts that don't exist anymore, and you charged nothing." He turned back to her, and now his expression was unreadable. "I pulled some strings this morning, made some calls to people who still owe me favors. It took 4 hours, but I found what I was looking for." He paused, and the silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. "Chief Warrant Officer Lorian Pascoe, service number November 7, 845, 23, Naval Aviation Maintenance Corps." Lorian's breath stopped in her chest. 3 years. 3 years of anonymity, of being no one, of hiding in plain sight. Shattered in a single moment, the admiral took a step closer. 8 deployments, Persian Gulf, Mediterranean, Pacific Fleet. Specialized in mission-critical hydraulic and avionics systems. Maintenance officer for carrier-based aircraft. His voice dropped. "But that's not what makes your service record extraordinary, is it?" She could not speak, could not move. The garage felt like it was closing in. "I know what you did in Afghanistan," the admiral said quietly. "I know about the 19 Marines. I know why you have that scar on your arm and that limp you try to hide. And I know why. You've been hiding in this garage for 3 years, fixing wheelchairs and refusing payment, trying to save people one at a time." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the workbench. "But what you don't know is that I have been looking for someone like you for the past 2 years. Someone with your skills, your training, and most importantly, your heart." Lorian finally found her voice. "Why are you really here?" The admiral looked at her for a long moment, and something like sadness crossed his face. "Because my daughter took 3 steps yesterday. 3 steps she wasn't supposed to ever take again. And when I asked her who fixed her device, she said a sad lady who works alone fixed it. A sad lady who wouldn't take any money." He paused. "And I realized that while I was searching for an engineer, I should have been searching for a mechanic. While I was looking for credentials, I should have been looking for someone who understands what it means to serve." He turned to leave, then stopped at the garage door. "I pulled your service record, Chief Pasco, all of it, including the parts that were classified, including the citations that were filed but never awarded, including the medical discharge papers that should have come with full disability but somehow got processed as minimal." He looked back at her. "Someone buried you, Chief. Someone made sure you disappeared into the system. And I want to know why, and I want to make it right." The admiral walked back to his car, leaving Lorian standing in the garage, her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. The 2 sailors followed their commander, and the vehicles pulled away, leaving only silence and the fading echo of a past she thought she had buried. Devra Okonkwo stood at her window, phone in hand, having watched everything. "Marcus," she called to her husband, "I think we just found out what her before was." Lorian stood motionless in the garage doorway. The business card sat on her workbench, crisp and official. Her hands were shaking. For 3 years, she had been invisible. For 3 years, she had been safe in her anonymity. In one morning, a 7-year-old girl's father had torn down every wall she had built. The question was no longer who she was. The question was, what would happen now that someone finally knew? If you have ever witnessed someone being recognized for something they never expected credit for, share that story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories about the people who serve in silence. Tomorrow, we continue with part 2, where the truth about Lorian's past finally comes to light. The business card remained on the workbench for 3 days, untouched. Lorian worked around it, moving tools and parts, cleaning oil spills, organizing her repair schedule, but she never picked it up, never threw it away. It sat there like a small white accusation, a reminder that the past was never as buried as she wanted to believe. She told herself the admiral had made a mistake, that he had confused her with someone else, that the service record he claimed to have pulled was incomplete or corrupted. But late at night, when the garage was quiet and the rain returned to drum against the roof, she knew better. Everything he had said was true. Every word had landed with the precision of someone who had read not just her file, but between its lines. The clients kept coming. An elderly woman with a walker that wobbled, a teenager whose powered wheelchair had stopped responding to half its controls, a middle-aged man with a prosthetic leg that no longer fit properly after he had lost more weight than his insurance would cover for adjustments. Lorian worked through each repair with the same methodical care, but something had shifted. The garage felt smaller, the walls closer. On the 4th day, the admiral returned. No advance warning, no escort this time, just a single staff. Car that pulled up at 8 in the morning while Lorian was replacing bearings in a mobility scooter. She heard the engine, recognized its particular sound, and her hands stilled on the wrench. He wore service khakis this time, not dress blues, less formal, but no less commanding. He walked into the garage like he had been invited, picked up the business card from the workbench, and set it back down in exactly the same spot. "You haven't called," he said. "I've been busy." "I can see that." He surveyed the 3 devices waiting for repair, the parts scattered across the workbench, the repair log with its growing list of names and impossibly low prices. "How many hours did you work yesterday?" "I don't keep track. Your neighbor does. She told me you were here until 2 in the morning, that the lights went out for maybe 4 hours, then came back on at 6. He paused. "That's not sustainable, Chief." "Don't call me that." It's your rank. You earned it. I gave it up 6 years ago. The Admiral picked up the torque wrench again, the one with the faded asset tag. Did you? Because from where I'm standing, you're still serving. You're still using the skills the Navy taught you. You're still putting other people's needs ahead of your own. The only difference is now you're doing it alone, with no support, no resources, and no recognition. He set the wrench down. And you're punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Lorian's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about what was or wasn't my fault. I know about Afghanistan. I know about the helicopter. I know the mission report listed you for a commendation that somehow never got processed. His voice softened. And I know about Lance Corporal Marcus Chen. The name hit her like a physical blow. She turned away, gripping the edge of the workbench hard enough that her knuckles went white. Get out. His family received a letter. From the 19 Marines you saved. Did you know that? I said get out. They wrote that Marcus gave his life so they could live, that his sacrifice meant something because you gave them the chance to make it home, to have families, careers, futures. The Admiral's voice remained steady, relentless. 19 families exist because of what you did in 90 minutes with salvage parts and hostile forces closing in. 19. Lorian spun to face him, and for the first time since he had arrived, he could see the full weight of what she carried. 20, she said, her voice breaking. There were supposed to be 20. The transmission held for 19. But Marcus, the weight distribution, the stress on the main shaft, I calculated wrong. I should have known. I should have reinforced the secondary coupling, but I ran out of time and I made a choice and he died because of it. The garage fell silent except for her ragged breathing. The Admiral waited, giving her space to continue or retreat, whichever she needed. He was 22 years old, Lorian whispered. He had a fiancée back home. He showed me pictures the day before. They were going to get married when he got back. He talked about wanting kids, about the house they were going to buy. She looked down at her scarred arm. The IED that got me 6 months later, part of me was glad. Part of me thought maybe that would balance it out. And that's why you've been here for 3 years, the Admiral said quietly. In this garage, fixing things for people who can't pay, trying to save enough people that eventually the math works out. It's never going to work out. No, it's not. Because you're trying to solve an equation that has no solution. Marcus Chen died in a war zone. That wasn't on you. That was on the enemy who shot down the helicopter, on the mission planners who put Marines in that situation, on every link in the chain except the one person who actually gave 19 of them away home. He stepped closer. You didn't kill Marcus. You saved everyone you could with, the time and materials you had. That's not failure. That's heroism. Lorian shook her head, unable to accept what he was saying. The guilt was too old, too deeply embedded. It had become part of her identity, the foundation on which she had built everything that came after. The Admiral pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then held it out to her. This is Corporal James Yates. He was on that helicopter. He's 31 now, married, 2 kids, works as a firefighter in Oregon. He swiped to another photo. This is Sergeant Maria Delgado. She runs a nonprofit helping homeless veterans. 3 kids of her own. Another swipe. This is Lance Corporal David Kim. He's a teacher, math and science. Has a classroom full of students who don't know that he almost died in Afghanistan. He lowered the phone. I could show you all 19. Every one of them is alive because of you. Every one of them has built a life because you didn't give up in that 90-minute window. You can spend the rest of your life mourning the one you couldn't save, or you can honor his sacrifice by continuing to use those skills to help people who need them. He set the phone on the workbench. But you can't do both. Not anymore. Not the way you've been doing it. Lorian looked at the photos, at faces she remembered from that day but had tried so hard to forget. Young men and women who were now older, who had lived years she had helped give them. The math was still wrong. 20 minus 1 would never equal a number she could accept. But for the first time, she could see what the Admiral was trying to show her. That maybe the equation wasn't about balance. Maybe it was about addition. What exactly are you offering? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Admiral picked up the business card, placed it directly in front of her. A position running an adaptive equipment workshop, fully funded by Navy Medical Research. You would rebuild mobility devices, prosthetics, anything veterans or their families need. Proper tools, proper parts, proper support staff. You could help 50 people a month instead of 5, 100 instead of 10. I work alone. You work alone because you think you don't deserve help. Because accepting help means accepting that what you do has value, and if it has value, then you have value, and that contradicts the story you've been telling yourself for 6 years. He met her eyes. I'm offering you a chance to stop punishing yourself and start serving again, the way you were meant to. Lorian looked around the garage, at the cramped space and inadequate tools, at the growing line of people who needed help she could barely provide, at the life she had built that was really just an elaborate form of self-destruction. I need to think about it. Fair enough? The Admiral headed for the door, then paused. My daughter asked about you yesterday. Wanted to know if the sad lady who fixed her legs was okay. I didn't have a good answer. For her. He looked back. Next time she asks, I'd like to tell her yes. He left without waiting for a response. The staff car pulled away, and Lorian was alone again, with the business card and the weight of a decision she had spent 3 years avoiding. She tried to return to work, tried to focus on the scooter repair, but her hands were shaking too badly. She set down the wrench and walked upstairs to her apartment, to the shelf where the photograph frame sat face down. She had not touched it in 6 years, had not looked at the faces captured in that moment of before. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. Then she walked away. Not yet. She was not ready yet. By afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. Devra had told 3 people about the Admiral's second visit, and those 3 had told others, and by evening, the entire community knew that something significant was happening at the garage where the quiet mechanic worked. They did not know the details. They did not need to. They knew enough to understand that Lorian Pascoe was someone important, someone who mattered, and that changed how they looked at her. The next morning, there was a line outside the garage, not 2 or 3 people, 15, 20, families with disabled children, veterans with failing equipment, people who had heard through the network that existed among those the system had failed that there was someone who could help. Lorian stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. I don't have the capacity to take all of these cases. I'm just one person. A woman near the front of the line, holding her son who had cerebral palsy, spoke up. We know, but we've been turned away everywhere else. Please, even if you can just look at it, just tell us if there's any hope. Lorian looked at the boy, at his twisted limbs and the wheelchair that clearly did not fit him properly. She looked at the line behind them, at faces that held the same desperate hope she had seen on Sienna's face, on Bryn's, on every person who had walked through her door in the past 3 years. Okay, she heard herself say. Okay, give me names and contact information. I'll work through the list as fast as I can. But I can't promise timelines. I can't promise I can fix everything. That's more than anyone else has offered, the woman said quietly. They filed through one by one, leaving devices and contact information and stories that blurred together into a symphony of need. A Vietnam veteran with a prosthetic leg that had cracked and been deemed unrepairable by the VA. A teenager whose power wheelchair had software that was no longer supported. Twin boys who needed custom walkers that insurance had denied. By the time the last person left, it was nearly dark, and Lorian had 27 new repairs waiting. She worked through the night, through the next day, through the following night. Sleep became something she grabbed in 2-hour increments. Meals became whatever she could eat while working. The repair log filled page after page. The prices remained impossibly low or absent entirely. On the 4th day, her body began to fail. The old injuries that she managed with physical therapy and careful movement started to flare. Her leg, damaged by the IED, began to drag. The scar on her arm, covering nerve damage that never quite healed, sent shooting pains up to her shoulder. But she kept working. She had made promises. People were counting on her. Devra watched from across the street, increasingly concerned. She had seen burnout before in her work as a home healthcare provider. She recognized the signs, the mechanical movements, the way Lorian no longer bothered to eat properly or rest, the light in the garage that never went out. On the 5th night, something broke. Lorian was attempting to lift a motorized wheelchair onto her workbench, a maneuver she had done hundreds of times. But her leg, pushed beyond its limits, simply gave out. She went down hard, the wheelchair, crashing on top of her, pinning her against the concrete floor. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, not just from the fall, but from 6 years of accumulated damage, stress pushed too far, a body that had been asking for mercy and receiving only more demands. She tried to push the wheelchair off, but her arms would not cooperate. She lay there, trapped, and for the first time since the IED, she allowed herself to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had kept locked away since Afghanistan. Devra found her 20 minutes later. She had seen the lights suddenly go out in the garage and had felt a spike of concern that proved justified. She called her husband to help lift the wheelchair, then helped Lorian upstairs. The mechanic could barely walk, her leg refusing to support her weight properly. In the sparse apartment, Devra cleaned the scrapes and checked for serious injuries. Nothing broken, but the toll was visible. Lorian's hands shook, uncontrollably. Her skin was pale, clammy. She was running on nothing but will, and will was not enough anymore. "You need to go to the hospital," Devra said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since I met you. But now you're beyond not fine. You're destroying yourself." Lorian did not argue. She accepted the pain medication Devra offered, let the woman help her into the military cot, and closed her eyes. Sleep came fast, dragging her under before she could resist. In the twilight of half-consciousness, with pain medication loosening the tight control she kept on her words, the truth spilled out. "I couldn't save all of them," she murmured. "Marcus, his name was Marcus, the transmission held for 19. But the weight, the stress on the secondary coupling, I calculated wrong. He was the last one out. The last one." Her voice cracked. "We had to leave him. The enemy was too close. We had to leave him, and I've never forgiven myself for that." Devra sat beside the cot, holding Lorian's hand, understanding now why this woman worked herself to exhaustion for strangers, why she refused payment, why she lived in a garage with nothing but the bare essentials. She was serving a sentence for a crime she had not committed, trying to save enough people that eventually it would equal the one she could not. "Oh, honey," Devra whispered, "you've been carrying that alone for so long." Lorian did not respond. She had slipped into true sleep, the first real rest she had gotten in nearly a week. Devra stayed for another hour, making sure she was stable, then quietly left, locking the door behind her. Tomorrow they would talk. Tonight, Lorian needed to simply be allowed to rest. 2 days passed before Lorian could walk without severe pain. 2 days where Devra brought food and checked on her, where the garage remained closed and the line of families grew longer. She tried to work on the 3rd day, managed 4 hours before her body forced her to stop. The math was brutal and unavoidable. At this rate, it would take her months to work through the backlog, and more people were coming every day. On the 4th day, a new family arrived. The father knocked on the garage door, and Lorian, still moving gingerly, opened it to find a man in his 30s holding the hand of a boy who looked about 10. The boy's left arm ended at the elbow, but instead of a simple prosthetic, he wore something that looked like it belonged in a research laboratory. "I know you're backed up," the father said, "but we were told you're the best, that if anyone could help, it would be you." Lorian examined the prosthetic arm. It was extraordinary work. Myoelectric sensors, neural interface, micromotors that would allow for individual finger articulation. The kind of cutting-edge technology that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and represented years of research. It was also completely non-functional. Where did he get this? Walter Reed. It was part of an experimental program for children of veterans. My son, Tal, he was born without his forearm. They fitted him with this 2 years ago. It was amazing. He could do everything. Write, play games, hold his baby sister. The father's voice tightened. 3 months ago, it stopped responding correctly. The hospital says he needs to come back to DC for recalibration. But we live here now. I lost my job. We can't afford the travel, the hotel, the time off work. The hospital says the equipment is too specialized for anyone outside their program to touch. Lorian looked at Tail. The boy met her eyes with a directness that children often had before the world taught them to look away. "I just want to hold my sister again," he said quietly. "She's learning to walk, and I can't hold her hand to help her." Every fiber of Lorian's being screamed that she should say no, that this was beyond her capability, that experimental military technology required resources and expertise she did not have. But she looked at this boy and saw Bryn, saw all the children she had helped, saw Marcus, who never got the chance to hold anyone's hand again. "Leave it with me," she said. "I'll see what I can do." The father's relief was palpable. They carefully removed the prosthetic, leaving it on her workbench like a sacred object. After they left, Lorian stood looking at it for a long time. This was different from anything she had attempted before. This was not just mechanical. This was bioelectric interface, neural mapping, software she had never touched. She spent the first day just trying to understand the system. The documentation was minimal, protected by proprietary restrictions. The diagnostic software required credentials she did not have. She could see the mechanical problems, could fabricate replacement components for the physical structure. But the neural interface, the calibration that made the whole system work, that was locked behind passwords and protocols designed to keep people like her out. The second day, she managed to access some of the diagnostic routines. The interface was corrupted. The calibration parameters had drifted outside acceptable ranges. She could see what needed to be fixed. But the software to actually make those changes was not something she could access or replicate. By the third day, she hit a wall, a complete, insurmountable barrier. She sat in the garage, holding the prosthetic, feeling the weight of Tyle's trust and her own inadequacy. For 3 years, she had operated on the belief that if she just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, she could fix anything. But this required something she did not have and could not manufacture. This required help. The business card sat on the workbench where it had remained for 2 weeks. Crisp white cardstock with embossed lettering, Rear Admiral Castor Aldridge, a phone number she had memorized days ago but refused to call. Lorian stared at it, picked it up, set it down, picked it up again. Her hand trembled. Asking for help meant admitting she could not do this alone. It meant opening a door she had kept shut for 6 years. It meant accepting that maybe the Admiral was right about everything. She looked at the prosthetic, at the photograph frame still face down on the shelf upstairs, at the line of families waiting outside who needed help she could not provide alone. The equation had changed. It was no longer about balancing what she owed. It was about maximizing what she could give. Her finger hovered over the phone's keypad. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to maintain the walls, to keep the world at arm's length where it could not hurt her and she could not fail anyone else. But then she thought about Tall trying to hold his sister's hand, about Bryn taking those first steps, about 19 Marines who were alive because she had not given up when the situation seemed impossible. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Maybe he would not answer. Maybe she could hang up and tell herself she had tried. Aldridge. Lorian's throat closed. She could not speak, could not force the words past the barrier of pride and fear and 6 years of self-imposed isolation. Chief Pasco? The Admiral's voice was calm, as if he had been expecting this call. "Are you there? I need help." The words came out broken, barely audible. "There's a case, a boy with an experimental prosthetic. I can fix the mechanics, but the neural interface, the calibration software. I don't have access, I don't have the tools, and I don't know what to do." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like hours. "Give me your address, I'll be there in an hour." "Why would you do this? Why would you help me after I've refused everything you offered?" The Admiral's answer was immediate and certain. "Because that's what sailors do, Chief. We never leave our people behind. Not in Afghanistan. Not in a garage where someone is trying to do the right thing alone." A pause. "And because my daughter asked about you again yesterday. She wanted to know if you were okay. I'd like to have a better answer for her next time." Lorian closed her eyes. For 6 years, she had believed that Marcus Chen's death meant she deserved to be alone, that accepting help was a betrayal of the sacrifice he made. But maybe, just maybe, the real betrayal was refusing to use the skills he died, giving her a chance to keep using? Maybe honoring him meant serving as many people as possible, even if that required letting others serve alongside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. I'm bringing a team, engineers from the Medical Research Division. They're going to want to examine your entire operation, assess your capabilities, and probably ask you about 50 questions you're not going to want to answer." His tone softened. "But they're also going to fix that boy's arm. and then we're gonna talk about what comes next." The call ended. Lorian set down the phone and looked around the garage, at the tools hung with military precision, at the devices waiting for repair, at the business card that had finally served its purpose. In 1 hour, the wall she had built would start coming down. She did not know if she was ready for that, but Tall needed his arm fixed, and Bryn needed her device maintained, and there were 25 other families waiting for help she could not provide alone. Ready or not, change was coming, and for the first time in 6 years, Lorian did not push it away. She used the hour to clean the garage, not just straightening tools, but actually making space for other people. She moved the lathe, organized the parts, created a work area where multiple people could operate without getting in each other's way. It felt strange, foreign, like preparing for an invasion rather than accepting help. But she kept working, driven by momentum and the knowledge that stopping now meant retreating into the isolation that had nearly destroyed her. At exactly 60 minutes, 2 vehicles pulled up. The Admiral's staff car and a Navy van marked with medical insignia. 3 people emerged, the Admiral in service khakis, and 2 engineers in civilian clothes with military bearing. They carried equipment cases and diagnostic tablets and the confident air of people who knew their expertise was needed. The Admiral made introductions. Commander Reese Nakamura, specializing in bioelectric interfaces. Lieutenant Simmons, an expert in pediatric prosthetics. They shook Lorian's hand with respect, not pity, and that made all the difference. "Show us what you've got," Commander Nakamura said. Lorian presented the prosthetic, explained what she had discovered, outlined the problems she could fix and the barriers she could not pass. The engineers listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on their tablets. When she finished, they exchanged a glance that communicated volumes in silence. "You've diagnosed it correctly," Lieutenant Simmons said. "The neural interface calibration has drifted. It's a known issue with this generation of the system. Normally requires specialized equipment only available at Walter Reed." She opened one of the cases. "Fortunately, we brought that equipment with us." They worked through the afternoon. Lorian handled the mechanical repairs, fabricating a new mounting bracket, replacing worn actuators, strengthening stress points in the frame. The engineers tackled the software, running diagnostics, recalibrating the neural interface, updating firmware that was 3 versions behind current. It was strange working with others, having to communicate, coordinate, share workspace. But it was also efficient in a way Lorian had forgotten was possible. What would have taken her days alone took them hours together. By evening, the prosthetic was whole, functional, better than it had been when it left the factory. Tall and his father returned to find not 1 person, but 4 waiting. The boy's eyes went wide at the sight of the uniforms, the equipment, the professional setup that his small family problem had apparently warranted. Lorian helped him put on the prosthetic, the engineers monitoring the interface readings, the Admiral watching with the careful attention of someone who understood what this moment meant. The prosthetic powered up. The neural interface synchronized. Tyle moved his phantom fingers, and the prosthetic fingers responded, smooth and precise. He made a fist, opened it, picked up a small toy his father had brought, manipulating it with fine motor control that had been impossible for months. His father's face crumpled. Tyle turned to Lorian and simply said, "Thank you." Then he turned to the engineers and the Admiral and repeated it. "Thank you all." After they left, the garage fell quiet. The engineers packed their equipment, but the Admiral lingered. He watched Lorian clean up the workspace, noting how she moved differently now. Still careful of her injuries, but with less of the mechanical exhaustion that had defined her movements before. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. "What you can do with support, with resources, with people alongside you instead of alone." Lorian set down the wrench she had been cleaning. "I saw that I couldn't have helped him without you. And tomorrow there will be another case you can't handle alone. And the day after that. And the day after that." He picked up her repair log, flipped through pages of names and prices that added up to financial suicide. "You're trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, Chief. Noble, but ultimately futile. So, what do you suggest?" "I suggest you accept the position I offered. I suggest you let us build you a proper workshop with proper resources. I suggest you train others to do what you do, multiply your impact instead of limiting it to what one person can accomplish in 18-hour days." He set down the log. I suggest you stop punishing yourself and start honoring Marcus Chen by saving as many people as possible. Lorian walked to the garage door, looking out at the neighborhood, at Devra's house across the street, at the families who had been waiting for days, at the life she had built that was really just an elaborate prison. If I say yes, she said quietly, everything changes. Everything already changed the moment you fixed my daughter's device, the Admiral replied. The question is whether you're going to let that change be positive or whether you're going to fight it until it destroys you. She thought about Tyle's face when he moved his fingers, about Bryn taking those first steps, about 19 Marines who were living lives because she had not given up in an impossible situation, about Marcus, who had died so they could have those lives. What would he want her to do? Keep hiding in a garage, helping a handful of people while destroying herself? Or step into the light and help hundreds, thousands even, if it meant accepting that she deserved to be helped too? I need one thing first, she said. Name it. I need to see the photograph. The Admiral looked confused, but Lorian was already walking toward the stairs to her apartment. He followed, uncertain what this meant, but understanding it was significant. In the sparse room, she walked directly to the shelf where the photograph frame sat face down. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. 6 years. 6 years of keeping these faces hidden, because looking at them meant confronting what she had lost and what she had failed to save. But she could not move forward while still hiding from the past, could not accept help while refusing to accept that she was worthy of being helped. She picked up the frame and turned it over. The photograph showed her maintenance unit in Afghanistan, 20 faces, including hers, young, confident, wearing the casual pride of people who knew they were good at what they did. She found Marcus immediately, third from the left in the back row, 22 years old, smiling, holding up a wrench like a trophy. She found the 19 others, saw them as they had been that day before the helicopter went down, before she had 90 minutes to do the impossible, before one of them died so the rest could live. They were frozen in that moment of before, forever young in the image, while somewhere out in the world they were growing older, raising families, building lives. Lorian touched Marcus's face through the glass. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you too. The Admiral stood in the doorway, giving her space. After a long moment, he said quietly, he would forgive you. In fact, he probably already has. The only person who hasn't forgiven you is you. Lorian turned the frame so the photograph faced outward, set it on the shelf where she could see it, where it would remind her every day not of her failure, but of the 19 reasons to keep serving. When do we start? She asked. The Admiral smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his weathered face into something warmer. Tomorrow morning, I'll send the engineers back with contracts and plans. We'll start by expanding this garage, getting you proper equipment, then we'll work on recruitment, training, scaling up operations. He paused at the door. Welcome back to the service, Chief Pasco, even if it looks different now. After he left, Lorian stood in the apartment looking at the photograph, at faces that were no longer hidden, at a past that was no longer a secret, at a future that terrified her, but also, for the first time in 6 years, contained the possibility of something beyond mere survival. She walked back down to the garage, sat at her workbench, and pulled out a fresh page in her repair log. At the top, she wrote a single line, Day 1 of whatever comes next. Outside, the street was quiet. Devra's lights were on across the way. The line of families would return tomorrow. The work would continue. But now, finally, it would continue with help, with support, with the knowledge that asking for assistance was not weakness, but wisdom. Lorian looked at the tools hung on the pegboard, at the business card she had finally used, at her scarred hands that had saved 19 Marines and would now save countless others if she could just accept that she deserved the chance. The phone on her workbench buzzed. A text from the Admiral. My daughter wants to visit the workshop when it's ready. She wants to see where miracles are made. I told her soon. Lorian typed a response, her fingers sure on the keys. Tell her any time. Tell her miracles aren't made alone. She set down the phone and returned to work. There was still a walker that needed repair, still a wheelchair that needed its control system rebuilt, still families waiting. But now, when she worked through the night, it was not punishment, it was purpose. and that made all the difference. If you have ever had to ask for help after years of trying to handle everything alone, share that moment in the comments. And if you believe that strength sometimes means accepting support rather than refusing it, consider subscribing. Part 3 continues tomorrow, where Lorian finally steps into the light and discovers what recognition truly means. The engineers arrived at 7 the next morning, with blueprints, supply catalogs, and the kind of organized efficiency that only military planning could produce. Commander Nakamura spread architectural drawings across Lorian's workbench, while Lieutenant Simmons took measurements of the garage, marking dimensions on a tablet. "We can expand into the adjacent lot," Nakamura said, pointing to the vacant space next door. "The Navy already owns it through a subsidiary. We'll maintain the original garage as your primary workspace, but add a clean room for electronics, a proper machine shop, and a reception area for client intake." Lorian studied the plans, seeing her cramped workshop transformed into something that could actually handle the volume of people who needed help. "How long?" 6 weeks for construction, another 2 for equipment installation. Nakamura looked up from the drawings. "But we start operations today. We've got temporary space set up at the Naval Medical Center. You'll work there while we build here. I have 27 active cases. We'll transport everything. Your tools, your current repairs, your client files. You won't miss a single appointment." Lieutenant Simmons closed her tablet. "The Admiral doesn't do things halfway, Chief. When he commits to something, it happens." They spent the morning cataloging every tool, every part, every piece of equipment. Movers arrived by noon, packing everything with the care usually reserved for sensitive military hardware. Lorian watched her entire operation disassembled and loaded into trucks, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. 3 years in this garage, 3 years of careful isolation. Now strangers were boxing up her life and moving it into the light. Devra appeared in the doorway as the last boxes were loaded. "So, it's really happening. You're leaving. Just for 6 weeks, then I'll be back. Will you, though?" Devra smiled gently. "Will you be the same person who comes back? Because I don't think you will, and I think that's a good thing." Lorian had no answer for that. She climbed into the passenger seat of the lead truck and watched the neighborhood disappear in the side mirror. The garage that had been her refuge and her prison growing smaller until it vanished around a corner. The Naval Medical Center facility was nothing like her garage. Clean white walls, LED lighting that did not flicker. Equipment so new, it still had protective plastic on the displays. A workspace 3 times the size of what she was used to. Other technicians moving through adjacent rooms, the hum of a fully operational facility. "This is temporary?" Lorian asked, unable to hide her disbelief. "This is standard," Nakamura replied. "This is what proper support looks like." They set up her workstation, arranged her tools with the same precision she had maintained in the garage. By afternoon, she was working on the walker repair she had started 3 days ago, but now with proper lighting, proper ventilation, and proper space to spread out her work. The difference was staggering. The engineers worked in the adjacent room, handling the more complex electronic repairs. They consulted with Lorian on mechanical issues. She consulted with them on software problems. It was collaborative in a way she had forgotten was possible. By evening, they had completed 5 repairs that would have taken her a week working alone. That night, back in her apartment above the garage, Lorian lay in her military cot, staring at the photograph on the shelf. Marcus's face looked back at her, frozen at 22, forever smiling. She whispered to the image, "I think I'm finally doing something that matters. I hope you'd approve." The days blurred into a rhythm. Morning transport to the medical center. 8 hours of repairs alongside the engineering team. Evening return to plan the next day's work. The backlog of cases began to shrink. Families received calls that their equipment was ready weeks earlier than expected. Word spread that the mechanic who worked miracles was now part of something bigger, better equipped, more capable. 2 weeks after accepting the Admiral's offer, Lorian received a call that changed everything. The Admiral himself, his tone formal in a way that immediately raised her guard. "There's a gathering next Friday, community event at the Jefferson Community Center. I'd like you to attend. I don't do public events. It's important. For Bryn, she wants to thank you properly, in front of the families you've helped." He paused. "It would mean a great deal to her, to all of them." Lorian, Thought about the little girl who had waved from the car window, about Tal who could now hold his sister's hand, about all the faces that had come through her garage door with hope and left with solutions. Just a small thank you? Just family and the people you've helped. Nothing formal, I promise. She agreed, though every instinct screamed at her to refuse. Public attention was the last thing she wanted, but she owed these families something. They had trusted her with their most precious concerns. The least she could do was accept their gratitude. The week passed in continued work. The new workshop construction was ahead of schedule. Lorianne visited the site twice, watching walls go up, equipment arrive, her scattered operation becoming something permanent and official. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life take shape. Friday arrived too quickly. The Admiral sent a car, which felt excessive for what was supposed to be a casual gathering. Lorianne wore her best civilian, clothes which amounted to clean jeans and a button-down shirt that had seen limited use. The Admiral met her at the center, wearing his dress blue uniform, which seemed odd for a casual event. "I thought you said this was informal," Lorianne said, eyeing the uniform. "It is. For the Navy, this is informal." He smiled, but something in his eyes suggested he was not being entirely truthful. "Come on, everyone's waiting." The moment she walked through the doors, Lorianne knew she had been deceived. The room was packed. Not 20 people, not 50. Over 200, filling every seat, lining the walls, spilling into the hallway. She recognized faces from her garage. Sienna and Bryn in the front row. Tall and his father. The Vietnam veteran with the prosthetic leg. The teenager in the wheelchair. Dozens of others she had helped over 3 years. But there were also Navy personnel in dress uniforms, local officials, the mayor, news cameras set up in the back. This was not a small thank you. This was something else entirely. Lorianne turned to the Admiral, betrayal sharp in her chest. "You said this was just family." "It is. Everyone here is family. Some by blood, some by service. Some by the fact that you gave them hope when the world had given them none." He gestured to the room. "They're here for you, Chief. Let them show you what you mean to them." Before Lorianne could retreat, Sienna was at her side, taking her hand, leading her to a seat in the front. The room fell silent as the mayor approached the podium. Lorianne's heart hammered. This was wrong. This was not what she wanted. Recognition meant visibility, and visibility meant vulnerability. The mayor spoke about community heroes, about people who served without seeking credit, about the quiet mechanic who had transformed lives from a garage most people drove past without noticing. Then Sienna took the podium, Bryn at her side. "3 months ago, I thought my daughter's life was over," Sienna said, her voice steady, but emotional. "Doctors told us to accept a new normal, to adapt to limitations, to lower our expectations." She looked down at Bryn, who stood confidently without support. "Then, a woman in a garage gave us a miracle, not just fixing a device, but refusing payment, working through the night, treating my daughter like she mattered when the system had decided she didn't." Bryn stepped to the microphone, had to stand on a small platform to reach it. "Miss Lorianne fixed my legs, but she also fixed my dreams. I can run now, I can play, I can do everything." She turned to look directly at Lorianne. "You made me believe in miracles." Other families came forward. The veteran with the prosthetic shared how Lorianne had repaired it for $80 when VA contractors wanted $3,000. The teenager's mother explained how her son could now attend college because his wheelchair finally worked properly. Tyle demonstrated his prosthetic hand, picking up small objects with precision, showing off for a room that erupted in applause. Each story was another weight added to Lorianne's chest. She had helped these people, yes, but she had not done it for recognition. She had done it for penance, for the equation that could never balance. Accepting praise felt like accepting something she had not earned. Then the Admiral took the podium and the room's energy shifted. This was no longer about gratitude. This was about something deeper. "Most of you know Chief Warrant Officer Lorianne Pascoe as the mechanic who fixed your equipment," he began. "Some of you knew her service record had been classified. What you don't know is why." He paused, letting the silence build. 6 years ago, in Afghanistan, Chief Pascoe was part of a mission that went catastrophically wrong. A projection screen descended behind him. Images appeared. Afghanistan landscape, a crashed helicopter. Lorianne felt her breath stop. A Marine helicopter was shot down in hostile territory. No backup, no parts, enemy forces. Closing in. The mission was declared lost. 19 Marines were going to die. The Admiral's voice remained steady, but emotion bled through. Chief Pasco had 90 minutes. That was the window before enemy forces would overrun their position. 90 minutes to rebuild a transmission using parts salvaged from destroyed vehicles. The images changed. Maintenance logs, mission reports with sections redacted. A commendation that had never been officially filed. She did it. She fabricated parts that didn't exist. She welded components that were never designed to work together. She essentially built a new transmission from scrap metal and hope. His voice rose slightly. That helicopter flew. 19 Marines made it home because of her hands, her training, and her refusal to accept that some problems are unsolvable. The room was silent. Lorian could hear her own heartbeat, feel eyes turning toward her, see the shift in how people looked at her, not just as the helpful mechanic, but as something more. But there were 20 Marines on that helicopter, the Admiral continued, and now his voice carried weight that pressed down on everyone. Lance Corporal Marcus Chen was the last aboard. The transmission held for 19, but the weight, the stress, the impossible engineering that Chief Pasco had accomplished in 90 minutes reached its limit. The helicopter couldn't take him. The room held its collective breath. Lorian's vision blurred with tears. She had promised herself she would not cry in public. The mission report classified the operation as a qualified success. 19 saved, 1 lost. Chief Pasco was recommended for a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor Device. That recommendation was filed, then mysteriously buried in administrative review. 6 months later, she was medically discharged after an IED attack. The citation never came through. The recognition never happened. She faded into the system. The Admiral turned to look, directly at Lorian. What she doesn't know, what the classified portion of that report contains, is that Lance Corporal Marcus Chen's family received a letter, written collectively by the 19 Marines she saved. I obtained a copy yesterday. A new image appeared on the screen, handwritten letter, multiple hands contributing different paragraphs. The Admiral began to read. To the family of Marcus Chen, your son gave his life so that we could live. There are no words adequate to honor that sacrifice, but we want you to know that his death was not meaningless. We are here because of what he gave up. We will have families because of his courage. We will build lives because he made the choice to be last, knowing what it might mean. And we will never forget that Chief Warrant Officer Lorian Pasco gave us the chance to honor his sacrifice by living fully. The Admiral's voice cracked slightly. The letter was signed by all 19 Marines, and at the bottom they added one more line. Please tell Chief Pasco that Marcus would forgive her, that we forgive her, that she saved everyone she could, and that is not failure, that is heroism. Lorian could no longer hold back the tears. They came in waves, 6 years of guilt and grief and self-punishment breaking through the walls she had built. Sienna gripped her hand. Bryn climbed into her lap. The room full of people she had helped watched her finally allow herself to feel what she had been denying. The Admiral descended from the podium. 2 Marines in dress blues emerged from the side door. Men in their early 30s now, but Lorian recognized them immediately. James Yates, David Kim, 2 of the 19. They approached her seat and came to attention. Chief Pasco, Yates said formally. Permission to render honors. Lorian could only nod, unable to speak. They saluted, held it. Then Yates pulled a case from behind his back. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, lay a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with a Valor Device, the citation that should have been awarded 6 years ago, the recognition that had been buried. The Admiral took the medal, and his voice carried the weight of official ceremony. Chief Warrant Officer Lorian Pasco, for actions above and beyond the call of duty in a combat zone, demonstrating technical expertise and personal courage under extreme conditions, resulting in the successful evacuation of 19 United States Marines. This commendation is hereby awarded with full honors and recognition. He pinned the medal to her civilian shirt. It felt heavy, real, like proof that what she had done mattered, even though it had not saved everyone. The entire room stood. Veterans saluted, civilians applauded, children cheered. And Lorian sat there, holding Bryn, wearing a medal she had never expected to receive, surrounded by proof that her service had meant something. When the noise finally died down, the Admiral spoke one more time. "You've been punishing yourself. For 6 years, Chief. You've been trying to save enough people that eventually it would equal Marcus. But that's not how honor works. That's not how service works." He knelt to be at eye level with her. "Marcus's sacrifice gave 19 Marines futures. Your sacrifice has been giving that gift to everyone who walks through your door. You haven't been failing him. You've been honoring him every single day." He stood and addressed the room. "Chief Pasco has agreed to head a new program, a workshop that will provide adaptive equipment repair and fabrication for veterans, their families, and children in need. Fully funded by Navy Medical Research, properly staffed, properly equipped." He looked back at Lorien. "She's going to help hundreds of people, thousands eventually. And she's going to do it with the support she should have had 6 years ago." The applause was deafening. Lorien sat in the center of it, feeling the weight of the medal, the warmth of Bryn in her lap, the presence of the 2 Marines who had flown home because she refused to give up. For 6 years she had believed that Marcus's death defined her. But this room full of people, these lives changed, these families helped. Maybe that was the real definition. Maybe service was not about the one you could not save. Maybe it was about everyone you could. After the ceremony, families approached her one by one, thanking her, sharing updates, showing her how the repairs had held up, how the equipment was still working perfectly. It was overwhelming and humbling and beautiful in a way she had not experienced since before Afghanistan. When the crowd finally thinned, the Admiral approached again. "There's one more thing." He led her outside, where a van waited. Inside were her tools from the garage, carefully organized. "We need you to come to the new workshop. It's finished early. It's only been 3 weeks. I told you, I don't do things halfway." They drove through the neighborhood to the lot next to her. Garage. Where a vacant space had been, now stood a building that seamlessly integrated with her original workspace. Clean lines, professional signage, Pasco Adaptive Systems, Veterans and Children's Workshop, supported by U.S. Navy Medical Research. Inside was everything she had dreamed of, but never thought possible. Proper machine shop with industrial-grade equipment, clean room for electronics assembly, reception area with comfortable seating, storage for parts and materials, office space, and in the center, her original workbench from the garage, installed as the heart of the operation. "We kept the core," the Admiral explained, "where the miracles started, but now it has everything it needs to keep making them." Lorien walked through the space, touching equipment, seeing her scattered operation transformed into something legitimate and permanent. This was not just a workshop. This was proof that what she did mattered, that who she was had value. "When do I start?" "You already did. 3 years ago in a garage where most people never looked." The Admiral handed her a folder. "Staff recommendations, 2 veteran technicians, 1 civilian specialist in pediatric equipment, all vetted, all trained, all ready to learn from you. I don't know how to manage people. You'll figure it out, the same way you figured out how to rebuild a helicopter transmission in 90 minutes. He smiled. "Besides, you won't be managing them. You'll be teaching them. There's a difference." Over the next 3 months, the workshop came fully alive. Joss, an Iraq veteran who had lost an arm and found purpose in helping others, learned hydraulic systems. Kieran, who had served in Afghanistan and knew what it meant to come home broken, mastered electronics. A civilian specialist named Dr. Amara Chen, no relation to Marcus, but the coincidence was not lost on Lorien, brought expertise in pediatric development and adaptive equipment. Together, they worked through cases that would have been impossible for Lorien alone. A veteran with a complex prosthetic leg that required custom fabrication, twins with matching walkers that needed specialized modifications, a teenager whose wheelchair required complete electronic redesign. The work was constant, challenging, and deeply meaningful. Sienna volunteered 2 days a week, handling intake and scheduling. She had a gift for making families feel heard, for understanding what they needed even when they could not articulate it. Devra stopped by regularly with food and encouragement, no longer watching from across the street, but participating in this transformation. The workshop operated with military efficiency, but civilian warmth. Every client was treated with dignity. Every repair was given the same attention Lorianne had always provided. But now, instead of taking weeks, repairs took days. Instead of turning families away, they could handle 50 cases a month. The math had finally changed. The impact had multiplied. Lorianne trained her team with patience she did not know she possessed. She showed Joss how to calibrate hydraulic pressure by feel, how to listen for the sound that indicated perfect tension. She taught Kieran to read circuit boards like maps, to understand the logic of how current flowed and where failures occurred. She demonstrated for Dr. Chen how to assess not just the equipment, but the person using it, how to understand that successful repair meant understanding the life attached to the device. The photograph from Afghanistan hung on the wall in her small office, no longer hidden, no longer face down. Marcus's face looked out at her every day, and instead of guilt, she felt purpose. She had not saved him, but she was honoring him by serving with everything she had, by using the skills he had died protecting, by making sure his sacrifice created ripples that kept spreading. Late one afternoon, 4 months after the ceremony, Bryn walked into the workshop after school. She was 8 now, taller, more confident, moving with the easy grace of a child who had never known limitation. She wore her school backpack and carried a folder of drawings. "Miss Lorianne," she called out, spotting her mentor at the main workbench. "I ran a whole lap in PE today without stopping." Lorianne looked up from the walker she was adjusting. "A whole lap? That's incredible. My teacher said I'm the fastest runner in my class now." Bryn beamed with pride. "She doesn't believe me when I tell her I couldn't walk a year ago." "That's because you make it look easy now." Bryn set down her backpack and pulled out the folder. Inside were crayon drawings, the kind that elementary school children created with more enthusiasm than technique. "I made these for you." The first drawing showed Lorianne in the garage, surrounded by tools, children standing around her with their various devices. The second showed the new workshop, bigger and brighter. The third was a rainbow with words at the bottom, in careful child handwriting. "Thank you for being my hero." Lorianne felt tears prick her eyes. "You've got it backwards, kiddo. You're mine. Dad says heroes are people who help others even when it's hard. He says you've been doing that longer than anyone knows." Bryn looked up with serious eyes. "Are you still sad?" The question was direct in the way only children could be. Lorianne considered it carefully. "I'm less sad than I used to be. I'm working on happy." "Good. Because you should be happy. You make people happy all the time." After Bryn left, Lorianne stood at the window watching her walk away, holding her father's hand, moving with easy confidence. This was why, this moment, this child who had been told to accept limitation, but instead ran laps. This was what honoring Marcus looked like. The Admiral visited monthly, no longer in official capacity, but as someone checking on an investment he cared about. He found Lorianne one evening working late, training Joss on a complex prosthetic, calibration. "You're still working too many hours," he observed. "The work is never done." "True, but you're not doing it alone anymore." He watched Joss practice the technique Lorianne had just demonstrated, noted the competence developing. "You're multiplying yourself. That's leadership." Lorianne wiped her hands on a rag, a gesture that had become automatic over years. "How's Bryn?" "She wants to be an engineer, says she wants to help people like you helped her." The Admiral smiled. "I told her she'd be perfect for it. Tell her to come by any time. She's always welcome here." "She knows. The whole family knows." He paused. "Speaking of family, the 19 Marines are planning a reunion next year. They'd like you to attend, to meet their families, to see what their lives look like now." The old fear rose immediately. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to decide now. Just know the invitation is standing. They want you to know that you're part of their story, not the tragic part, the part where someone refused to give up on them." After he left, Lorianne returned to the workbench. The garage felt different now. It was no longer a place of hiding, but a place of building. The walls that had once been a prison were now a foundation. The tools that had been instruments of penance were now instruments of purpose. She finished the prosthetic calibration, checked it twice, set it aside for morning delivery. Tomorrow, there would be 6 new cases. A veteran with a failing wheelchair. A child with a walker that no longer fit properly. Repairs that once would have overwhelmed her, but now were simply work to be shared among capable hands. 6 months after the ceremony, on a cold morning when autumn had turned to winter, Lorianne arrived early to find someone waiting at the workshop door. An older woman, 70s, with kind eyes and a photograph clutched in her weathered hands. "Are you Lorianne Pascoe?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Ellen Chen, Marcus's mother." The world stopped. Lorianne's breath caught. She had spent 6 years carrying this woman's son's death, and now here she stood, flesh and blood, proof that the loss was not abstract, but devastatingly real. "I'm so sorry," Lorianne managed. "I tried everything. I should have reinforced the coupling, should have calculated the stress distribution better, should have found a way to make it work for all 20. Ellen Chen stepped forward and took Lorianne's hands in hers. "My son wrote me a letter before that mission. He always wrote before dangerous operations. In it, he said that if anything happened, I should know that he was serving with the finest mechanics in the Navy, that he trusted his life to their skills every single day." She smiled through tears. "He trusted you, and you did everything humanly possible. That's all anyone can ask." It wasn't enough. It was enough for 19 families. It has to be enough for ours, too. Ellen pulled out the photograph she had been holding. Young, Marcus in dress blues, the same image from Lorianne's unit photo. "I wanted you to have this. I wanted you to know that we don't blame you, that Marcus wouldn't blame you, that the 19 Marines who came home because of you wrote us every year on the anniversary. They tell us about their children, their lives, their futures. They tell us that Marcus's sacrifice mattered because someone like you made sure it meant something." Lorianne took the photograph with shaking hands. Marcus's face smiled up at her, forever young, forever trusting. "I've been helping people," Lorianne said quietly, "trying to honor him by using the skills he died protecting. I know, the Admiral told me. He said you've helped hundreds of families, that you've been serving without recognition for years." Ellen squeezed her hands. "That's exactly what Marcus would have wanted. Not monuments or medals, but service that matters. You've been living the values he died for. That's the greatest honor you could give him." They stood together in the cold morning, two women bound by loss and purpose. And slowly, Lorianne felt a weight lift that she had carried for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. Not gone completely. Grief was not something you escaped, only something you learned to carry differently, but lighter now, manageable. Ellen stayed for coffee, met the team, saw the workshop that existed because her son's death had taught Lorianne that service could take many forms. When she left, she hugged Lorianne tightly and whispered, "Thank you for keeping him alive by living well." The seasons turned, the workshop celebrated its first full year of operation. Hundreds of families helped, thousands of repairs completed, lives changed in ways both dramatic and subtle. Lorianne still worked long hours, but no longer alone, still pushed herself, but no longer as punishment, still carried Marcus, but no longer as a burden she bore in isolation. One evening in spring, when the light slanted, golden through the workshop windows, Lorianne stood at her original workbench completing a repair. The space around her hummed with activity. Joss in the machine shop, cutting custom parts. Kieran in the electronics lab, testing circuit boards. Dr. Chen in the fitting room, working with a family to customize a walker. This was what multiplication looked like, what proper support created. She finished the repair, a wheelchair joystick that would allow a teenager to return to school, set it aside for tomorrow's delivery, looked around the space that had once been a cramped garage and was now something that mattered. That helped. That honored not just Marcus, but everyone who had ever served and been forgotten. The photograph from Afghanistan hung on the wall, 20 faces, including hers. She walked to it, touched Marcus's image through the glass. "We're doing good work," she told him. "I hope you can see it. I hope you know that you are part of every person we help, that your sacrifice keeps rippling forward." Outside, the street was quiet. The neighborhood had embraced the workshop, taken pride in having something that mattered right here among them. Devra waved from across the street, heading home from her shift. A testament to community, to connection, to the value of being seen and known. Lorianne locked up the workshop, checked that everything was secured, and walked to her apartment. The military cot had been replaced by a proper bed. The hot plate supplemented with a real stove. Small changes that marked a life lived rather than merely survived. The face-down photograph long since turned to face the world. She made tea, stood at the window watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new families, new opportunities to serve with the skills that had been forged in combat and refined in a garage and now multiplied in a workshop that bore her name but contained the efforts of many. This was what redemption looked like. Not dramatic, not flashy, just steady work by skilled hands day after day, helping people who needed it, honoring a promise made to 19 Marines and one who didn't make it home, service that didn't end when the uniform came off, purpose that didn't require recognition to have meaning, love expressed through precision and care, and the refusal to give up on people the system had decided were too expensive or complicated to help. The medal sat in a case on her shelf, proof that what she had done in Afghanistan mattered. But the real proof was in the workshop, in the children walking, in the veterans mobile, in the families who had hope restored. That was the citation that counted. That was the recognition that meant something. Lorian finished her tea, checked her schedule for tomorrow, and climbed into bed. The photograph on the shelf showed her at her workbench, surrounded by tools and purpose. Bryn had taken it last week and insisted it be framed and displayed. "So you can see yourself the way we see you," the girl had explained. In the image, Lorian was focused on a repair, completely absorbed in the work, her hands steady, her expression calm. This was who she was, not the tragic figure who had lost a Marine, not the decorated veteran with classified citations, just a mechanic who refused to accept that some problems were unsolvable, who believed that everyone deserved equipment that worked, who honored the dead by serving the living with everything she had. Sleep came easily now. No nightmares of failed transmissions, no visions of Marcus being left behind. Just the quiet satisfaction of work well done, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more opportunities to help, more chances to serve, more moments where skilled hands could change lives. The workshop would open at 6, families would arrive, repairs would be completed, the cycle would continue, and somewhere in Afghanistan, in a place she had not been able to return to, a memorial bore Marcus's name. But his real memorial was here, in this workshop, in these hands, in the hundreds of lives changed because someone had refused to let his death be meaningless. This was service. This was honor. This was what it meant to never stop being a sailor, even when the uniform was gone and the missions looked different and the enemy was not hostile forces, but bureaucracy and poverty and systems that failed the people who needed them most. Lorian closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Tomorrow would come soon enough. There was always more work, always more people, always more chances to prove that service was not about seeking recognition, but about doing what needed to be done because it was right. In the darkness, the workshop sat ready. Tools in their places, parts organized, equipment calibrated, waiting for morning and the next family and the next repair and the next opportunity to honor the promise made 6 years ago in a hostile desert. The promise that those who served would not be forgotten. That sacrifice would mean something. That skilled hands would keep working, keep helping, keep serving until the very last person who needed it had been helped. That was the real story. Not dramatic rescue or public recognition, just quiet competence applied with relentless dedication to people who mattered. That was what heroism looked like in the aftermath. That was what honor required when the medals were awarded and the speeches were finished and the real work of living with purpose began. The night passed, morning came, the workshop opened, and Lorian Pascoe, Chief Warrant Officer retired, mechanic by choice, servant by calling, began another day of turning broken into whole, impossible into achievable, and tragedy into purpose. Have you ever watched someone transform pain into purpose, loss into service, isolation into community? Have you known someone who honored the fallen by living fully? Share their story below. And if this journey reminded you that service takes many forms, that heroism can look like steady hands fixing what others said was broken beyond repair, consider subscribing. Because some stories don't end with the credits. They echo when the lives changed, the families helped, the communities transformed by one person who refused to stop serving.
You know what stayed with me most about this story? It wasn't the ceremony or the medal or even the admiral showing up. It was how long Lorian lived in that garage. 3 years. 3 years of fixing wheelchairs for almost nothing, sleeping on a military cot, keeping that photograph face down. 3 years of waking up every single day and choosing to punish herself for something that wasn't her fault. I kept thinking about that while watching this unfold. How many people do we know who are carrying something like this? Maybe not a war story, maybe not 19 lives saved and 1 lost, but carrying guilt for a decision they made under impossible circumstances, carrying shame for not being perfect when perfection wasn't even possible. What really got to me was how invisible she made herself. She wasn't just hiding from recognition, she was hiding from connection, from help, from anything that might suggest she deserved to be okay. And I think that's what made this story feel so heavy. It wasn't about what happened in Afghanistan. It was about what she did to herself for 6 years afterward. There's one moment I can't stop thinking about. It's not the big public reveal. It's that phone call. When she's sitting in the garage, holding that prosthetic arm she can't fix, staring at the Admiral's business card for what must have felt like forever. And then she dials. The script says her throat closed, that she could barely force out the words, "I need help," 3 words, and they probably felt like admitting defeat, like betraying everything she'd built her life around for 6 years. Because asking for help meant accepting that she couldn't do it alone. And accepting that meant admitting she had value, that she deserved support. And that contradicted the entire story she'd been telling herself since Marcus died. The story that said she didn't deserve good things, that suffering alone was somehow honoring his memory. That moment matters because it's not about heroism or courage in the traditional sense. It's about the kind of strength it takes to stop destroying yourself, to admit that the way you've been living isn't sustainable, to let someone see you struggling and accept their hand when they reach out. That's a different kind of bravery, and honestly, for some people, it's harder than any combat mission. This story is really about what happens when we confuse penance with purpose. Lorian thought she was honoring Marcus by working herself to exhaustion, by refusing payment, by living in poverty. But what she was actually doing was trying to balance an equation that could never be balanced, 20 minus 1. No amount of wheelchairs fixed or families helped would ever change that math in her mind. And I think that's something a lot of people understand, even if their version looks different. We carry things we think we deserve to carry. We punish ourselves for decisions made in impossible moments. We reject help because accepting it feels like letting ourselves off the hook. Like if we stop suffering, we're somehow dishonoring the people we couldn't save or the mistakes we think we made. What the Admiral understood, what took Lorian 6 years to even begin accepting, is that isolation isn't honor. Destroying yourself isn't service. Real service, meaningful service, requires being healthy enough to actually help people. It requires accepting that you have value, that your skills matter, that the people you save count just as much as the ones you couldn't. The bystanders in this story are interesting too. Not the Admiral or the families Lorian helped, but the system that let a decorated veteran disappear into poverty, the bureaucracy that buried her commendation, the structure that medically discharged her and then forgot she existed. Nobody was actively cruel. They just didn't notice. And sometimes that's worse because there's no villain to blame, just a system that fails people quietly. A lot of people watching this have probably felt invisible at some point. Maybe not for 6 years in a garage, but invisible in the way that matters, where your skills go unrecognized, where you're helping people but nobody sees it, where you're carrying weight alone because asking for help feels impossible. You don't need to have saved Marines in Afghanistan to understand what it feels like to believe you don't deserve good things, to think that suffering is somehow required, to reject support because accepting it means admitting you matter. And you definitely don't need military experience to know what it's like when someone finally sees you, really sees you, not just what you can do, but why you're doing it. When someone recognizes the weight you're carrying and says, "Let me help you carry that." That moment when walls you've built for protection become walls that are trapping you, and someone offers a door. The truth is, most of us have a version of that photograph turned face down, something we're hiding from. Some part of our past we think disqualifies us from moving forward, and the hardest thing is turning it over, looking at it, accepting that what happened doesn't define our entire worth. So I'm curious what moment stayed with you most. Was it the Admiral showing up? The ceremony where her secret came out? That conversation with Marcus's mother? Or was it something quieter, like her finally asking for help, or turning over the photograph, or just the image of her working alone in that garage for 3 years? And here's the bigger question I'm left with. What does it actually mean to honor someone's sacrifice? Lorian thought it meant suffering. The 19 Marines who wrote that letter thought it meant living fully. Who was right? If you've ever had to learn the difference between penance and purpose, or if you've watched someone you care about carry guilt that wasn't theirs to carry, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes sharing these stories helps us process our own. Thanks for staying with this one. I know it was long, but some stories need time to breathe. Take care of yourselves.